The church did not feel silent in the way empty places fall into silence. It felt constructed, as if the quiet itself had been shaped over years through repetition, through rituals performed so many times that they no longer required thought, through prayers spoken so often that even the act of speaking them had become automatic, and the air inside seemed to carry that history, heavy and persistent, as though every word that had ever been spoken there had left behind something that refused to fade, something that lingered, something that pressed gently against anyone who entered, and the candles lining the stone walls burned slowly, their flames trembling slightly, just enough to make the shadows appear alive, stretching across the floor, and climbing the pillars like something searching for form, something unfinished. And the people gathered that evening were not unaware of the shift in atmosphere, even if they could not explain it clearly, because there are moments when a room changes before anything happens, when conversations shorten without reason, when glances linger longer than they should, when attention sharpens without direction. And that was what had settled over the church that evening. Not simple expectation, but tension. Something that had been building quietly through whispers, through fragmented conversation, through the repeated mention of a name that did not belong within those walls, and yet had entered them regardless. Friedrich Nietzsche, and that name carried something with it, something unsettling, something that did not fit, something that did not submit to the structure that surrounded it. And spaces built on certainty do not remain comfortable when faced with what they cannot contain. They tighten, they focus, they prepare, even if no one acknowledges it openly. And so when Nietzsche stepped inside, alone as always, unchanged in posture, unchanged in expression, he did not enter as a man stepping into sacred ground. He did not lower his gaze, did not adjust his movement, did not adapt himself to the expectations of the room. He walked forward with the same calm, measured pace he carried anywhere, as if the structure of the place had no authority over him at all, and that alone created tension, because most men instinctively adapt to the spaces they enter. They shift their tone, their posture, their presence in subtle ways that signal belonging. But Nietzsche did not signal anything, and when a man refuses to signal belonging, he reveals a structure that demands it, and that is what unsettles people most, not disagreement, but exposure. And near the altar stood the priest, already aware, already prepared, his posture upright, his expression composed, his presence rooted in something that had never required him to question itself deeply. And he watched Nietzsche not with curiosity, but with intention, because this was not a coincidence. This was something that had been moving toward this moment through whispers and repetition, through the quiet accumulation of tension that builds when an idea enters a space where it does not belong. And the priest understood that such a presence could not be allowed to move through the space without challenge, because doubt that arrives loudly can be resisted. But doubt that arrives calmly, without asking permission, is far more dangerous. And so he stepped forward, not quickly, not aggressively, but with controlled authority. And when he spoke, his voice moved easily through the church, shaped by years of speaking in spaces where he did not need to fight for attention. And he asked what a man who denies God expects to stand on. What foundation remains when belief is removed? What meaning can exist when the structure that has guided men for centuries is rejected? And the question settled into the room with weight, because within that space it already carried an answer, and those who listened felt it not as something to consider, but as something already known. And Nietzsche did not respond immediately. He allowed the silence to stretch, not as hesitation, but as control, because silence in a space like that forces attention. It strips away distraction. It makes every word that follows unavoidable. And when he finally spoke, his voice was calm, almost quiet, but precise. And he said that removing belief does not remove reality. It removes illusion. And the words did not collide with the structure of the church. They slipped beneath it, and that is what made them dangerous, because direct opposition can be resisted, but inversion destabilizes from within. And the priest responded, his tone firmer now, saying that without God there is no morality, no meaning, no order. That belief is not weakness but necessity, and that without it man becomes lost. And the people in the room felt the weight of those words, because they were familiar, because they had been repeated enough to feel true. And Nietzsche listened, not interrupting, not dismissing, as if the argument itself was something he had already passed through long before this moment. And then he answered, saying that what they call morality is often nothing more than inherited fear, organized into rules that no one questions. Because questioning them would require standing alone, and the words moved slowly through the room, because they did not attack belief directly. They questioned its origin, and questioning origin destabilizes structure more deeply than attacking its outcome, and the priest's expression shifted slightly. And that was a moment where the evening truly began. The silence that followed was no longer stable, no longer something that held the room together. It had begun to loosen, to move, to reveal something beneath it, and the people in the room felt it, even if they could not name it, because their attention no longer rested comfortably on the priest alone. It moved, hesitated, returned, as if something within them had begun to divide without their permission, and the priest saw it, and he understood that if he allowed that moment to expand, the structure he represented would lose something essential, not power, but inevitability. And so he spoke again more firmly, saying that Nietzsche's words ignored the reality of human weakness, that men are not capable of standing alone. That belief is not a chain but a support, something that prevents them from collapsing. And the room leaned slightly toward him again, because familiarity creates comfort, and comfort creates agreement. And Nietzsche listened, and when he spoke, his voice remained calm, but his words cut deeper, saying that it is always interesting how quickly men defend their chains once those chains are described as necessary, how rapidly they begin to call dependence strength once they forget what independence feels like. And the words did not provoke anger. They provoke discomfort, because they require reflection, and reflection is something most people avoid. And the priest responded, saying that without belief, without structure, man becomes dangerous. That history proves this. And Nietzsche answered that history proves something else as well, that men are often most dangerous when they believe themselves justified by something greater than themselves. And the room shifted again, because now the argument had moved beyond belief into power, into responsibility, into the unseen forces that shape behavior. And the priest, feeling that shift, turned to suffering, saying that without God, suffering becomes meaningless, unbearable, that men need something beyond themselves to endure it. And Nietzsche did not dismiss suffering. He did not reject it. But he said that meaning imposed from outside is not the same as meaning created within, and that one of the greatest illusions men accept is that their pain has purpose simply because they are told it does. And the room grew heavier, because this was no longer abstract. This was personal. And the priest pressed harder, asking whether Nietzsche would strip men even of that comfort. And Nietzsche answered that false comfort is not mercy, it is delay, and that what men avoid today will confront them later with greater force. And now the room had begun to change in a deeper way, because uncertainty had entered, and uncertainty spreads quietly. And Nietzsche continued, saying that belief often functions as protection, shielding men from the need to confront themselves directly, and that the cost of the protection is that they never discover what they are capable of without it. And the priest stood, still, and for the first time, he did not interrupt immediately. The silence that followed was deeper than anything that had come before, not because there was nothing to say, but because what had been said had moved beyond easy response. And the priest felt it, the shift, the subtle but undeniable movement of the room away from certainty and into something less stable. And when he finally spoke, his voice was quieter, asking whether Nietzsche truly believed that men could endure such freedom, such absence of structure, such confrontation with themselves. And Nietzsche answered that the belief that men cannot endure freedom is what has kept them from ever discovering whether they can, and that once a man accepts that he cannot stand without support, he stops trying, and what might have been strength remains unrealized. And the words did not strike as attack. They settled as possibility, and possibility is more dangerous than contradiction, because it invites thought, and thought leads inward, and the room had already begun to turn inward, and the priest asked whether Nietzsche accepted the suffering that would come from such a transformation, and Nietzsche answered that suffering is not created by truth, it is revealed by it, and that avoiding that suffering does not eliminate it, it only delays it. And the room remained silent. But now the silence was real, not structured, not ritualistic, but internal, and Nietzsche, seeing this, did not push further, and before leaving, he spoke once more, saying that the question is not whether. Belief is comforting, but whether it is true, and whether a man is willing to face what remains when that truth is confronted honestly. And that line settled into the space with finality, and no one responded, and Nietzsche turned and walked away, and the silence that remained behind him was different, because something had been seen that could not be unseen.